All right, then. John in his teaching, if you notice over in the book of John, chapter 1, I know I've got Luke up there, but John chapter 1. And in John chapter 1, it tells us here about John and his disciples as they're going about, or as he's going about, teaching the Word of God and helping people to get ready for the coming of the kingdom. In John 1 and verse 35 in particular, I tell you what, let's read 35 and 36. Who will read John 1, 35, 36? Carter, go ahead.
Again the next day, John stood with two of his disciples, and looking at Jesus as he walked, he said, "Behold the Lamb of God."
Okay. So John, of course, had a very wide, broad following, even though he was out mainly in the wilderness, of Judea. So it's a desert region. People would go out there to him. Remember, he was down at the Jordan River very often, teaching people, baptizing people. He had baptized Christ, of course, in the Jordan. But it talks about these disciples who are with him, and it goes on to explain these disciples in verse 37, that two of them heard him speak, heard John testify that Jesus was the Lamb of God, and they followed Jesus. So, of course, he was pointing men to the Christ, and they're following along. And you drop down a little bit further, and it says, let's read verses 40 through 42. John 1, 40 to 42. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Josh.
One of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, son of Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "Here comes the Messiah," which is translated to Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Now when Jesus looked at him, he said, "You're a son of Jonah. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated to stone.
Okay, so what two disciples show up here, or mentioned by name? Verse 40. So you've got Andrew, right? We don't really talk a lot about Andrew. I think maybe we forget. I know I tend to forget. Well, he was Peter's brother, so Andrew here, and then Simon Peter. And immediately Jesus begins to focus in on Simon, son of Jonah. You'll be called Cephas, translated to stone, pebble to stone. So the idea is you've got these men who have been influenced by John, have been hearing his teaching. And what kind of teacher was John, by the way? When you have a description of him, how is he described? How does Jesus does a comparison contrast later, Mike?
Jesus called him son of thunder.
Well, the brothers James and John were sons of thunder, but he
described himself as the disciple of Jesus' love.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm John the Immerser. Yes. So John the Immerser, what kind of man was he? How does the Bible describe him? How does Jesus later compares him as he's talking about men and?
Well, he's kind of considered a wild. What the Christ in the wilderness did. He lived off the man.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
In the wilderness, he was to God way, Jesus way.
Okay. Yes, he's out there and he's living off that land, teaching God's way, pointing people to him. But he was a very direct and very bold. He just ripped the hide off of people if they came out to him and they needed to be addressed with their sins. And he was calling on men to repent. He had the camel's hair, the leather belt. He ate locusts and wild honey, as Carrie had referenced there. But this is who Peter, Andrew, some of these other men have been listening to for some time. So they were men who were attuned to the truth of the Word of God, and he is pointing them now to the Christ. And these are good men. These are righteous men. They desire to know the things of the kingdom. Their hearts are ready to receive that truth. And so that's why John's pointing them to Jesus, but then Jesus embraces them, and we know later he kind of officially designates 12 of these men as his apostles. And we know there was a larger group there, but this is where we see them beginning to make that first connection to and following after Jesus because of the work that John had done. Now, when you drop down to verse 44, let's read John 1. I tell you what, 43 through 47. We'll just grab that little snippet, 43 to 47. Who's got that? Caleb?
The day following, Jesus would go forth into Galilee, and findeth Philip, and saith unto him, Follow me. Now Philip was of Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip findeth Nathanael, and saith unto him, We have found him of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael said unto him, Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Philip said unto him, Come and see. Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him, and saith of him, Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile.
Okay, and then there's the following exchange there. He's really surprised how the Lord knows something about him. The Lord says, I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you, and he declares, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel, not having a full comprehension. But one of the questions, I believe it's page 14 in the workbook, it asks where Philip was from. So verse 44, where do we learn he is from? Okay, Bethsaida or Bethsaida, sometimes it's pronounced. But notice it's up there at the very northern end of the Sea of Galilee. So these guys are from Galilee, from that region. Of course, the disciples are all Galileans, the apostles, that is. But they're from up there. Who else is from up there besides Philip? Andrew and Peter. All right. Normally you associate Peter with what city? Where's he settle? Just to give a little spoiler, it's Capernaum. Okay, he settles over in Capernaum. But they're originally from over here at Bethsaida. Bethsaida, you can go over there. They have the ruins. They've uncovered it. It's a neat place to go and visit. They have this, little tourist display out there. This is kind of what it looks like. It's got the palm trees, as you can see, date palms, things like that. It has some beautiful flowers out there. Again, I think I mentioned this before. It very much reminds me of like Southern California, where it's kind of an arid region, but it's very beautiful, and it actually is quite fertile in these areas. But these are some of the ruins. They have various things you can look around there, and this is what when you look at the ruins and they explain them to you, they say, it's from this time period, and some of those things are from around the 1st century. So you can get a pretty good glimpse. But the thing that impresses me is when you read through the accounts of the Bible, and then if you travel over there, you just do a little bit of research and study, and now online we can do a lot of this. You can actually go and walk where they were walking. And the archaeological evidence proves what the Bible says is accurate, or it confirms. I shouldn't say proves, but it confirms, it corroborates what is written in the text. And so these are not things that are recorded that somebody made up. It's not a fantasy world. It is reality of where men and women lived in ancient times, and where all these events unfolded. So they're from up in the area of Bethsaida there. It talks about the fact that Jesus then goes down to Jerusalem. He's going to go down there for a feast, and we want to notice that in the Passover. So let's go to John chapter 2. John chapter 2. beginning there in verse 1, before he goes down there, it tells us about the fact that he is at a wedding, and the wedding is where? Okay, Cana of Galilee. And one of the things that points out to us is that there was more than one Cana. And so this is Cana of Galilee, very specific in designating where that takes place. And notice, how far away is Nazareth? You know, it's just essentially down the road, a few miles down the road. It's not very far at all. And so Jesus would have been familiar with this area, as we talked about before, but he's at Cana of Galilee. Who is it that's concerned about the fact that they ran out of wine? His mother. And that may indicate that she was one of the ones in charge of hosting and making sure everything was okay. And then as much as it's Jesus and the disciples who are also there, it's probably a relative of theirs that is having this wedding. Remember, James and John are the cousins of Jesus. And so the disciples are there, Mary's there, Jesus is there. They would generally, as we do, have people we know at a wedding and invite them in. And then somebody who is in charge of the refreshments and whatnot, that's going to be somebody you know pretty well. That's usually taking care of those things. So anyways, they're there. This is where he turns the water to wine. And it says at verse 11, John 2, verse 11, this beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifest his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Now, there is a question on page, I think it's 19. Maybe it's page 17. Is it the page that has the miracles of Jesus? Which page is that for you guys? Because I think I've got an old one. 19? Okay, that's what so page 19 there on the left on number 6. Why do you think Jesus... Oh, I'm sorry. Not that one. Verse 7. Read John 1:43. So where he knew about Nathanael sitting under the tree. The question is, was that a miracle that he knew that? And then the follow-up on that is, if you believe that it was a miracle, then how can you say that John 2:11 is the beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee? So first of all, let's settle. Was it a miracle that Jesus knew what Nathanael was doing earlier that day? Yes, exactly. There's no way humanly possible he could have known what somebody miles away was doing at a particular time, right? So that was a miracle. Well, reconcile, if you will, John 2:11, the beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. Any thoughts on that, Mike?
I believe that the miracle that was done here at the wedding was a messianic miracle pointing to the Old Testament, that he was fulfilling things in the Old Testament. And that's why they believed in who he was, because they recognized that he was fulfilling things that were in the Old Testament.
Now remember that the people generally at that wedding feast did not know how this came about, but the servants, the people behind the scenes, knew what it was about. And it is a visible outward sign that they could see. We put water in here and now we're drawing out wine. So it's something very obvious, as opposed to something Jesus conceived or knew or understood in his mind that he expressed. That's not quite the same as being able to look at, well, this was water and now I'm drawing out this wine, this grape juice from these water pots that were filled up. So it's more of an outward manifestation. And as Mike is saying, this is something that's being done that people could look at, they could witness, they could understand, that are pointing to him who he is. Now, when he was telling Nathanael about seeing him earlier that day. That was between him and Nathaniel, him and Philip, him and Peter, Andrew, whoever was right there with them. That was just that small group. This is a little bit of a larger group. So this is talking about that beginning of signs. He's manifesting his glory among the people now. Now then, in verse 13, John 2, verse 13, the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. So it's likely, if you look at this map here, that Jesus went down on the eastern side of the Jordan and probably crossed over around the region of Jericho. That was a common path, remember, for the Jews to go down to the feast. And he goes to Jerusalem. And as he's there, we read about various things in John chapter 2, going into chapter 3. So what happens in John chapter 2 when he gets to Jerusalem? There about verses 14 and following. What does he do when he gets to the temple? He cleanses that temple, right? He's angry that they have made merchandise, that they've turned this into a place of commerce versus a place of worship. Well, he returns then, or John 3 is where he has an interview with Nicodemus. This is when he's down there for the feast, and Nicodemus, it says, comes to him at night, and we're not going to go through all of that. But John chapter 4, let's read verses 1 through 3, please. John 4, 1 through 3. Who will grab that for us? Go ahead, Caesar.
Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize but his disciples, he left Judea and departed by name to Galilee. But he knew.
Okay. Yeah, so it says the fact that he's down there with them. Why is he leaving this region? It says in verse 1, it doesn't give us a lot of detail, but
The Pharisees are becoming more aware of him, and they'll probably investigate.
yes, he knows, hey, there's an issue here. Attention is being drawn to me. And one of the questions in the material was, so verse 6, back on page 19, verse 6, question 6 on the left-hand column there. Why do you think Jesus mostly taught and did miracles in Galilee rather than Judea? Mike?
Kind of a smaller area, wasn't as populated, and probably more open to receive.
Yeah, they were more open to receiving him. They were more of the regular folks, that what we might describe as blue collar folks, just, salt of the earth kind of people. The Jewish leadership was not as heavily present up in the region of Galilee. They're more focused down in around Jerusalem and that area there. And so he's kind of out of the spotlight up there, and the people being more receptive, and he doesn't want to provoke a conflict with the Jewish leadership too soon, because he's got work to do. He needs to be about teaching and performing miracles and giving the disciples and others evidence that he is the Christ, and preparing them, of course, for the time he's going to be crucified and then leave and return to heaven. So that's why he's up there in Galilee, more than being down in Judea, Jerusalem, and those areas. But he wants to return up to Galilee. But John 4, verses 4 and 5, what does it tell us there? John 4, 4 and 5. Who's got that? Caesar, you just want to finish that? John 4, 4 and 5, go ahead.
But he needed to go to Samaria. So he then came to a city called Samaria, which is called Sychar, the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph.
All right. So he's there in Samaria, which would have been an unusual thing sometimes for Jews to want to travel through there. Sometimes it was necessity. But he needed to go through there, it says verse 4. And why did he need to go through there? Seems obvious when you read the rest of chapter 4, but why does he need to go through Samaria? Who's he meet here at Joseph's well? Samaritan woman. And what unfolds with that Samaritan woman? What's kind of the outcome there?
Whole conversation about who he is, how he plays a role in salvation of the nation, salvation of the Gentiles. All that's kind of wrapped in there through this one conversation. And he proves to her that he is the one who is the sin, just how all he knows about her. It's not possible.
Right. And then what does she do? She goes tells him, what do? They go and listen to him. And then they make the statement, hey, we believe because not what the woman said, but because we've heard what you said. So this opened that door for Samaritans to be aware, hey, the Messiah has come. And that's why when you fast forward into Acts chapter 8, and Philip gets up to the Samaria and he's preaching, and there's a great harvest of souls up there. Jesus has here helped lay that groundwork and prepare them to receive the gospel when it begins to be taught from Jerusalem to Samaria and beyond. So very interesting unfolding of events there. So he goes through Samaria, has the encounter with the woman at the well and the other Samaritans who are in the area, and then he presses on, and notice here in verses John 4:43 to 45. Who will get that for us? John 4:43 to 45. Go ahead, Ron.
Now after 2 days he departed from there and went to Galilee. For Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things he did in Jerusalem at the feast, for they also had gone to the feast.
Okay, so it's interesting. There's a little note here that these Galileans had traveled down. They knew what he had done in Jerusalem. They go back. He's arrived back. They're very receptive, as we were talking about a while ago. And it says in 46 that he came again to Cana of Galilee, where he had made water wine. There was a certain nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. So anybody have an idea about how far Capernaum and Galilee are apart? How far apart they are? Can you do the little measure thingy? All right, so it's about 20 plus miles. Some say up to 32, depending, I guess, on exactly where they measure and if they go straight or if they go the route of travel. But if you just figure about 20 miles away, remember this man comes to him and he seeks for his son to be healed. And Jesus does not go to his son, but then the man finds out his son has been healed. So he healed him from a distance here. So that was, I would say a miracle that stands out in the fact he's not even in the presence of this young man. He hasn't even met him, and yet he's able to heal him. And that's confirmed, of course, by the Father and those who were around that child at the time. So you have all of that going on. Jesus traveling back into Galilee to do most of his work and teaching and preaching. In Luke chapter 4, we get into something here. In Luke 4, and beginning there in verse 16, let's read Luke 4, just verse 16 to begin with. Who's got that? Go ahead, Ron.
So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read.
Okay, so there he is in that synagogue in the town where he grew up. And if you read on down through here, what unfolds? Take a peek at verse 22. As he's read from the prophet Isaiah, in verse 22, How do the people respond? What's their experience here? Mike and then Ron?
Well, that he's just a common person, how can he speak like this? This is Joseph's son.
Right. So what does that tell you about these people relative to Jesus when they say, this is Joseph's son?
They view him as a regular person.
View him as a regular person?
Yes, I was going to say the way he read must have been just astounding because it refers to it as they were marveled at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. So he's reading, of course, with the mind of the author of those words.
Right.
Which
right.
has greater meaning and inflection, as we might say.
And we've got this little snippet there in 21. Today the scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. There's something in that he's saying, and there may be more that Luke has just summarized and he's left that out. But they're listening to him speaking, and it's like, wow. He's saying some profound things here.
And so, as you're mentioning, Stephen, they look at him as Joseph's son, and as we talked previously, a carpenter. So he had a hard labor, skilled, but here he is in a completely different forum with an impression upon them that they have never experienced before.
Right. This doesn't sound like a carpenter, a mason, as we said. So when they say Joseph's son, anything in there? Tom?
It's not God's son.
Okay, they're not recognizing him as God's son. But the thing is, they know who Joseph is. They know who Mary is. They obviously, I think in making this connection, they know who Jesus is, whether they've ever had interaction or conversation with him before, or whether they just knew, yeah, that belongs to Joseph that lives down over in this part of Nazareth and his family, and we're familiar with them. And, we know his brothers, we know his sisters, and that's who that is. And we just can't square what he's saying with what we know about him so far. Nancy.
Also the commonality, it was his practice.
Yes.
They were used to seeing him come in there.
Yes.
And I don't know if that meant the reading too, or if it just meant being there, but in any case, it was his practice.
Right. Exactly right. So they're impressed as he is speaking to them, and then he goes on to make the application of prophet not without honor. And he points out, look, back in the Old Testament, these two times when Gentiles were helped and the Jews weren't. And what's their response to that? Verse 28. Let's read 28 and 29. Who's got that? 28 and 29. Tom?
When they heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath. They rose up and drove him out of the town and brought him to the brow of the hill, in which their town was built, so that they could throw him down the cliff.
Okay. Yeah. So they're so mad they want to kill him. I mean, imagine that. They go from marveling at what he's saying to he's not fit to live and we're going to get rid of him right now. Somebody that they knew, at least in the community, they're ready to do. They knew he grew up there. And they're ready to kill him. That's how impassioned they are. So remember that Nazareth is there. If you see it on this map, you see Galilee there. You see Nazareth right above the word Galilee. You see it's built right on the edge of the peaks on the northern side or northeast side of the Valley of Jezreel. And here it is a little bit closer. You can kind of see if the elevation, like the green is the lower and the yellow, and the darker the yellow, the higher it is. So Nazareth is up. It's elevated. I think it's about 2,800 feet up there. But it's up there. And here's a picture of modern Nazareth. And you can see it's a hilly region. And that ancient city's built near the edge of a hill. And it says they're taking him out there. They're going to toss him off to get rid of him. So you get a picture of maybe what it was like and what he's dealing with there. But of course, it says in verse 30 that he slips out through the midst of them and he went his way. So they were not able to kill him on this occasion. But in Luke chapter 4, Luke 4, and I think I've got the wrong reference for it here. But when he goes to live at Capernaum, that may be John. No, not John 4. Anyway, if you can find that, I've got the wrong thing written down. It's the wrong thing on the little chart.
Possibly verse 31 of Luke 4.
Luke 4. What does that say?
And he went down to Capernaum to a
Thank
city
you.
of Galilee and was teaching them on the Sabbath.
Okay. So he goes to Capernaum and he ends up living there at Capernaum. Again, this is one of those towns that you can visit today. It talks about it being the town of Jesus. There's a synagogue from the late 4th century. So it's after the time of Jesus, but it's around that. It says it was built upon the remains, because very often they would just keep building on top. They'd tear down the older, it'd fall down, maybe an earthquake or whatever, and they would go. And so you can see that this synagogue, the ruins of it there, that's pretty good, and you get a good idea of the size of it, the layout of it, and everything like that. In Capernaum, you also have the house of Peter, what they say is the house of Peter. Now, I'm personally going to go on a limb. Anywhere the Roman Catholic Church says that this is the exact spot, it's probably not the exact spot. It's probably somewhere else. But you get an idea. This is the kind of home that was built in the 1st century, and it was an octagonal type of layout. And you could picture some of the accounts in the New Testament, how families would be in a home, maybe a 1-room home or a 2-room home, and the kitchen layout and various things like that. So it's just interesting to see that there are ruins from back in the 1st century, and this house is supposedly from the 1st century. Now, it's in the region of Capernaum. Who knows exactly who lived there and all that. But anyways, again, just interesting to look at and to see. So he's there at Capernaum. This is where you get into Luke chapter 5, and they are out on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus goes where Peter, James, and John are. And Peter is in the boat. Remember that they are washing their nets there in Luke 5, verse 2. He gets into the boat and he teaches the multitudes from the boat. And why would he do that? Why would he teach multitudes from the boat? Hannah?
Voice would spread broader from where he was located.
Voice would spread broader. Anybody ever been out at the lake and you can be up on the shore and somebody could be like 100 yards, but down on the lake, and maybe they're sitting in a boat quietly and they're talking, but you can hear every word they're saying. He's down there for the acoustical purposes of it. And so in that boat, he's able to stand there and teach and not be pressed by the crowd, but it also amplifies his ability to speak. And that's where, remember, he calls them to be fishers of men. And we're not going to go through all of that, but this is kind of what it looks like around that Sea of Galilee there. The Sea of Galilee, I think, is like 7.5 miles across, and if memory serves, about 14 or 15 miles long. It's not tremendously big, but it is a sizable body of water, inland body of water. It's technically not a sea, but it's a lake. And one of the things we had in our workbook was, what are the names of the Sea of Galilee? What various names are given to it?
Tiberias.
Sea of Tiberias, right. The book of John talks about it being the Sea of Tiberias. What else? Lake Gennesaret, Lake Chinnereth. maybe the Sea of Chinnereth, but there are many different names given to the Sea of Galilee here, so don't let that throw you off as you're reading through either the Old or the New Testament. Sometimes they just have a different name for whatever reason, the local people or the particular time period, and they're calling it one thing versus another, but Sea of Galilee is the most common. We know it by. Mike?
Yeah, I think also depends on the person's perspective who's writing. Are they traveling or not? They know what a sea looks like. That's not a sea, that's a lake. So they choose something that.
And the audience that's receiving it, they may be more familiar with one name than the other. So yeah, exactly right. All right, so he calls the disciples there, Peter, James, John. He works on calling other disciples. In John chapter 5 then, if you jump over to John 5, we have a time marker in John chapter 5. In John 5 and verse 1. John 5 verse 1. Who's got that for us? Short little verse. Go ahead, Carter.
After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem.
Okay, so it's believed that this is around the Passover time, so this would be the second Passover that's mentioned. And again, the book of John, it mentions 3 different Passovers, so that's how we get a rough time frame of Jesus and his work and his labors, about 3 years or so. And it says in verse 2 that they're in Jerusalem. They're by the sheep gate, a pool which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porches. And so you can see the little cutout of Jerusalem there, and you see the various places around Jerusalem. You see the pool of Siloam, the pool of Israel, pool of Bethesda. That's the one up on the north end. The top of that little cutout there. And so it's talking about events that are unfolding there. And again, they have uncovered these things in archaeological digs. So it's and confirmed these are the names, these are where they were. So all of this, as you read through it, you understand are things where people are going and doing and teaching, and you can have great confidence in it. All right, so he's there, he heals the man, and just for the sake of time, we're going to press on. This is where we come to Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Let's read Matthew 5, 1, and Caleb, if you could get Matthew 5, 1 for us, please.
And seeing the multitudes, he went up into a mountain, and when he was set, his disciples came unto him.
Okay, so what do we call this? This lesson that he teaches in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Okay, the Sermon on the Mount. All right, so the Sermon on the Mount, who does it say is there? Verse 1.
His disciples.
His disciples. Generally, who do we associate that with?
Well, oftentimes we think about it being apostles sometimes, but it's the people that really are following him.
Yes, I would agree. It would include the 12, but then there's also Matthias and Barsabbas, Acts 1, probably some others. There, remember, we get an understanding there's a group of women that are traveling with Jesus that are helping to take care of things that we read about, particularly at the cross and the scenes unfolding at the cross and the resurrection after. So there's a larger group there, but it presents it as these are the disciples. Now, in Luke's account of a similar lesson, it talks about the fact that he had come down from the mountain. Remember, when he comes down from the mountain, he teaches what sometimes people call the Sermon on the Plain, but it's very familiar. So what we have is Jesus teaching the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, to the smaller group of people, and then he goes and he gives a summary in Luke to the larger crowds that are there. And so that's why you see some differences between Matthew's account of this lesson and Luke's account of what unfolds here. But the thing is, you can go over there, and when you're at the Sea of Galilee, because it was in this region, you can look and you can understand, okay, this is the kind of place where he did it. And this is, again, this is a Catholic edifice. But they say this is the area, the region which he did it in. So there's that broader picture of the area. And you get over there and you can see how there could be thousands of people for a sermon on the plain that Jesus could speak to, or the areas around there, how there could be 5,000 men besides the women and children. So you could see 10,000 people. There are areas there big enough for him to stand and address a crowd like that. It's not as though it would be difficult to get that size of a group in a particular place. Any thoughts or questions there? Mike?
Are you saying they're two different sermons or the sermon?
Yeah, my understanding would be he taught one lesson to his disciples on the mountain. He came down on the plain and there's the crowds there, and he kind of gave a summary of what he had taught them up there. This is I see Matthew 5, 6, and 7 is a little more personable. But if you want to say they're the exact same group, I'm not going to draw a sword over that. Okay. But anyways, so you can go and explore that region, see the things that are around there. It's very interesting, very neat. But Matthew chapter 8 then, after the Sermon on the Mount is given, in Matthew 8 is where he heals the centurion's servant. And it says that Matthew 8 verse 5, he entered Capernaum. Centurion came to him, pleading with him, Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed and dreadfully tormented. Jesus said, I will come to him. But how did the centurion respond in this case? Mike? Yeah, you don't need to come to my home, because he understood what? He understood authority. This man, and Jesus proclaims it, in Luke's account, I believe it is, I've not seen such great faith in Israel. That here this man is who understood the authority of Jesus to be able to speak and affect the physical realm just by his words, because he had authority over that. He had authority over that man's health and well-being, and he believed Jesus could just speak the word and it would be done. And of course, it was done. Now that's in Capernaum. And then it shifts. If you follow the little list here in the cutout on the left of our thing, it shifts over to him raising the widow's son in Nain. And that is in Luke chapter 7. So in Luke 7, as he is there in Nain, and just notice where Nain is on the map. You see the Sea of Galilee, you see Capernaum up at the north end. You go down to the southwest there, you cross Canaan, and then go south to Nazareth, and then southeast to Nain. So this is all in the region of Galilee that he's performing these miracles, and he raises her son. Luke chapter 7, verse 17. Who will get that for us? Luke 7:17. Go ahead, Jacob.
And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all of the surrounding region.
Okay, so where did the miracle take place? Nain, which is in what region? Or borderland of what region?
Galilee.
Yeah, it's in Galilee. It's getting over to that Decapolis region. But the report goes down through Judea. Why would that be? How could that be? So they're in Nain. And do you remember the account? What was happening when Jesus raised the widow's son? What were they doing with him? Okay. They were carrying him out. They were going to bury him. right? And there's a crowd there. So there are dozens of witnesses to this resurrection. And of course, do you think people are going to talk about that? They're talking about it, and it's telling us it sweeps down through Judea. This news of what he's doing is getting out. It's spreading far and wide. It wasn't just the people in Nain that knew about it. The people throughout essentially the land of Israel heard about Jesus, his miracles. And it's part of what's drawing attention to him when he shows up in Judea, and the Jewish rulers, they keep an eye on him. Mike?
We also understand that Luke is getting together eyewitness accounts, so he probably spoke to an eyewitness about this.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. All right, so the next thing that he does, this again is around the region of the Sea of Galilee there, over to the east of it, in, I guess we should show Decapolis there. But it talks about the demon-possessed man being healed. Remember this, where he does cast the legion out of the man and into the pigs, and they run down to the Sea of Galilee, and they drown there. And so that's taking place, number 2 on this one, on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And if you ever see on that portion, it's a very steep hill. You can understand how pigs would maybe run off a cliff and go down into the sea there. But that's where all of that is taking place. I think we're going to put a pin in it right there. And we'll finish the teaching. We'll be brief on the rest of the teaching and things. I want to press on in, if we can at all do it, into that next lesson number 5, on the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. And we'll look a little bit more around Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives, and things like that. So, Lord willing, we'll pick up there next week.